The stories presented in this video are real, but we have changed the characters' names and altered images to protect their identities. The creator of this video is not an investigative officer. These narratives have been sourced from various internet platforms. Our intent is not to accuse or target anyone in particular. Thank you for understanding.
Welcome to True Crime Stories Hub. Our story begins today. One by one, the lights in the Carter home went out on the evening of January 27, 2011, leaving the peaceful suburban street in lengthy shadows. Nobody could have predicted the disaster that would soon come to pass in the ensuing silence. Secrets were difficult to keep in the neighborhood, which had traditionally been a quiet place where everyone knew one another. However, a sinister secret that would destroy the appearance of peace and leave a path of murder in its wake was about to come to light as the winter wind howled outside. The narrative takes place in a neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York, where the houses are close to one another and the lawns are immaculate. Every family appears flawless from the outside. Every driveway has a shiny automobile, and people wave to one another as they pass. Laura Morgan exemplified excellence. She had everything at age 38, a lovely home, a charming husband, and 2 kids who were exceptional at all they did. She was the type of woman that other ladies admired. She was usually smiling and well-groomed. Richard Morgan, her spouse, was a prosperous corporate attorney who put in a lot of overtime and frequently traveled for work. Laura, who was left to run the home alone, had become used to his absences. She spent her days doing yoga, volunteering for charities, and going out to coffee with other local wives. On the inside, though, Laura was lonely. She started to feel the effects of spending so much time alone in a house that was too large and too silent. She missed the thrill and fire that used to drive her existence. Richard had grown aloof and more preoccupied with his work than their union. With the exception of the one thing she most desired, affection, he gave her everything she could ever ask. Laura first became aware of Emily Carter, the lively and gregarious daughter of their next-door neighbors, when Richard was on one of his frequent business trips. Laura found the energy Emily carried with her, which she brought home from her summer at college, to be intoxicating. Emily was youthful, carefree, and vibrant, much as Laura used to be. Laura started to experience desire, something she hadn't felt in years, as they spent more time together. Emily had her entire life ahead of her at the age of 22. She had come home for the summer to consider her options while attending an upstate college to study art. James and Anna Carter, Emily's parents, had lived next door to the Morgans for as long as Emily could remember, and they had always been close. She had always been treated with kindness by the Morgans, and she looked up to them, particularly Laura, who seemed to have it all worked out. Emily initially viewed Laura as a mentor with whom she could share her concerns, goals, and future with. However, Emily's perception of Laura changed as they spent more time together. Emily felt both excited and alarmed by the way Laura gazed at her, with a hunger in her eyes. Then that happened one evening. A line that could never be uncrossed was crossed by what began as an innocent friendship. Ambition has always been a part of Richard Morgan's personality. He had risen through the ranks of the company, giving his family a comfortable and opulent lifestyle. However, sacrifice accompanied success. His marriage suffered as a result of his job's increasing demands on his time. Laura had changed, and he could sense it by the way she avoided his contact and appeared aloof and preoccupied. However, he persuaded himself that it was only a phase and that they would overcome it. He was unaware of the extent of the situation's demise. Emily was the daughter of James and Anna Carter, who were proud of her. They were ecstatic to have her home for the summer because she had always been the source of their happiness. They never questioned the time she spent with Laura and had complete faith in her. After all, they had known and respected Laura for years, and she was their friend. However, as the weeks went by, Anna started to see minor adjustments in Emily. She appeared agitated and preoccupied. Unaware of the true nature of Emily's relationship with Laura, Anna blamed it on the demands of college life. Laura Morgan saw Emily Carter for the first time on a sunny spring day. Everyone appeared to be outside taking in the sun as the neighborhood came alive with the warmth of the season. Laura saw Emily while taking her daily afternoon stroll. She was reading a book while seated on the stairs of her parents' home. Since Laura had last seen Emily, Emily had matured greatly. She was no longer the little girl who rode her bike around the neighborhood. She was now a young lady, self-assured, attractive, and able to light up the entire street with her grin. Emily looked up and met Laura's eyes as she waved as she went by. Talking on how nice it had been to see the sun again and how the winter had been, they exchanged a few courteous comments. However, there was more to their discourse, a spark of connection that ignited between them. Laura accepted Emily's invitation to sit with her on the stairs, and they conversed for what seemed like hours. Laura told tales about her life, her family, and her hardships, and Emily talked about her college years, her aspirations, and her worries. Laura was amazed by the ease with which they interacted. It had been a while since she had experienced such a connection. Laura and Emily discovered more and more excuses to hang out together as the days went by. They would sit in the backyard with a glass of wine, go for long walks, or meet at the local park. They became closer with each encounter, and the casual discussions quickly evolved into something more profound. Neither of them could deny the tension that existed between them. Being around Emily made Laura feel alive, something she hadn't felt in years. Emily, however, was attracted to Laura's self-assurance and maturity. Laura possessed all the qualities Emily valued: elegance, knowledge, and a sense of mystery. They ended up back at Laura's place one evening after an especially lengthy walk. The night air was cold, and the sun had gone down. Unspoken words filled the silence between them as they sat on the porch. Before Laura could react, Emily turned to her and leaned in to give her a kiss. Laura's mind raced for a second, but then she kissed Emily back, feeling the rush of the forbidden. Their rendezvous were clandestine after that night, including whispered words and stolen moments. Even though they were aware that what they were doing was wrong, it was nonetheless thrilling. The excitement of it all, the danger, the secret, and the passion she had long missed enthralled Laura. The intensity of their affection engulfed Emily as well. Enticed by the novel world Laura had introduced her to, they concealed their affair, taking care to prevent anyone from figuring out what was going on. Before meeting Emily, Laura would drop her kids off at school and wait for Richard to depart for work. They shared their stolen moments together, far away from prying eyes. Every kiss, touch, and look was risky, but that just added to the excitement. These times spent with Emily were like a narcotic to Laura. The thrill of being wanted, of escaping the confines of her ideal existence, was too much for her to handle. As a result, the romance went on, getting deeper every day and guiding them both in a direction they could never go back to. Things had begun to shift by the summer of 2010. Richard Morgan, who had always been so preoccupied with his work, started to observe the minor changes in his wife's conduct. He had married a different Laura. Her formerly friendly and inviting grin appeared forced, and she was aloof and preoccupied. She was out of the house more often, usually with evasive excuses about running errands or seeing friends. At first, Richard attempted to ignore it, attributing the widening distance between them to his own rigorous work. However, a persistent suspicion began to grow. Richard discovered Laura sitting by herself in the dimly lit living room one evening after returning from an extended business trip. Her eyes were far away, as if she were deep in contemplation. She dismissed his question about what was wrong, saying she was simply exhausted. Richard, however, was wiser. The tension and uneasiness that had developed between them were palpable to him. There was a problem, but he was unable to identify it. In the meantime, Laura and Emily's covert affair persisted, but it was no longer the exciting diversion it had been. A creeping sense of dread had taken the place of the excitement that had once driven their enthusiasm. After being so engrossed in Laura, Emily started to realize how serious what they were doing was. She was plagued by guilt, particularly when she looked at her parents, who had entire faith in Laura. The excitement of the forbidden was evaporating, and she recognized that what they were doing was wrong. One hot July afternoon was the tipping point. Emily ended the affair because she could no longer live with the guilt. She realized she needed to cease the restless nights she had spent struggling with her conscience. She made plans to meet Laura in their favorite location, a quiet area of the local park, away from prying eyes. Emily was obviously nervous when she got there. She was having trouble finding the perfect words, and her hands were shaking. Laura knew right away that something wasn't right. Emily avoided making eye contact, and a chilly resolve took the place of her customary warmth. Emily ultimately expressed that she could no longer sustain their connection after a tense quiet. Citing the immorality of their behavior, she stated that it had to halt. Laura reacted desperately as she felt a growing panic. She started to feel overwhelmed by the idea of losing Emily, something she had feared. She extended her arm and took Emily's hand in a firm, entreating hold, showing that she was unwilling to release it. Laura was clearly afraid of going back to the loneliness and emptiness she had known before Emily entered her life. Even though Laura was desperate, Emily persisted in her resolve, knowing that stopping the affair was the proper thing to do, despite the internal conflict it caused. She made an effort to distance herself by highlighting how their connection was hurting them both. But because she felt compelled to keep what they had, Laura wouldn't let go. Laura adopted a menacing posture in a last-ditch effort to stop Emily from leaving. She threatened to tell everyone, including Emily's parents and Laura's husband Richard, about their relationship if Emily left. This stern ultimatum, which would leave Emily with nothing, highlighted Laura's desperate attempt to keep the person who had grown essential to her. The menace hung heavily between them, and Emily froze. Laura wasn't bluffing, she knew that. She hesitated because she was afraid of losing everything she valued and of the truth being revealed. It rocked her to her core when she saw the desperation and dread of abandonment in Laura's eyes. Emily became aware of her situation. She could feel the walls closing in on her as Laura's words replayed in her head. The balance of power had changed, but Emily reluctantly consented to carry on the romance. Once based on reciprocal desire, the relationship had devolved into a power struggle, with Laura now in the lead. The fire and love that once blazed so brightly between them had been corrupted by control, remorse, and dread. This signaled the start of the end, as the affair descended more into darkness and drew them both closer to a terrible finish. Emily Carter had reached a breaking point by early 2011. Once an exciting diversion, The romance with Laura had become into a continual cause of anxiety and worry. For the sake of her future and sanity, Emily understood she had to end it. Laura no longer felt alive, but she had begun dating a new man from her college who gave her a sense of purpose. She felt secure, normal, and free of the weight of secret that had held her down for so long when she was with him. Emily distanced herself from Laura as she became more involved in this new romance. She avoided seeing Laura altogether and stopped returning her calls and texts. Emily's choice was irrevocable. She had to leave Laura's poisonous hold on her and move on with her life. But Laura's fascination increased as Emily grew more distant. Laura saw Emily's transformation right away. The indicators were obvious. Emily's abrupt lack of availability, her coldness, and the way she talked less and less about their future together. Laura started to become paranoid. The idea of losing Emily was intolerable, and she could feel her sliding through her fingers. Laura had used Emily as her secret, her thrill, and her escape. Laura was afraid that without her, she would revert to her previous life, which was drab and uninteresting. Laura grew increasingly desperate as Emily withdrew. She began unexpectedly visiting Emily's home in an attempt to see her and rekindle that bond. When that failed, she would check for evidence of her betrayal by driving past Emily's college in the hopes of seeing her with that new man. Laura was driven to the verge of insanity by her obsession with Emily and her dread of losing control over her. The tension between Laura and Emily peaked on that chilly January 26th day. Emily was left alone at home when her parents, James and Anna Carter, left for the day. Laura was aware of this and viewed it as her final opportunity to speak with Emily. The idea of Emily moving on without her and being replaced by someone else was too much for her to bear any longer. Laura was thinking about what she would say and how she would persuade Emily to stay with her as she drove to the Carters' house. Tension was high in the air as Laura arrived. Laura's unexpected arrival startled Emily, and the discussion soon became heated. In a frantic, intense attempt to figure out why Emily was abandoning her, Laura demanded answers. Firm in her resolve, Emily made it apparent that their affair was finished in an attempt to put a definitive end to it. Laura, however, was unable to accept it. Her fury escalated into rage, and her despair into anger. The altercation became unmanageable. Laura was so overcome by her feelings that she was unable to control them. She lunged at Emily in a fit of unrestrained rage. It was a short but fierce battle. In a blind fury, Laura put her hands around Emily's neck and squeezed as hard as she could. Emily made an effort to resist, but Laura's hold was too firm and unyielding. Emily's body went limp in a matter of moments, and her eyes lost their vitality. Laura was in disbelief as the truth of what she had done started to set in. She could not understand the horror of what she had done, so she stood there, shaking, looking at Emily's dead body. Immediately, panic struck. Laura was aware that she needed to hide her identity and make it appear as though it wasn't what it was. A heartless murder. She hurriedly cleared the premises of any evidence of her presence, making it appear as though a heist had gone awry. She left Emily's body behind in the hopes that it would distract the police, stole a few belongings, and ran away. The following day, the sound of Anna Carter's cries rocked the peaceful neighborhood. When she got home, she discovered her daughter's motionless and cold body on the floor of the living room. There was chaos in the scene. The room was littered with broken glass, overturned furniture, and emptied drawers. But Anna didn't notice any of that. Her beloved daughter Emily was lying there motionless, and that was all she could see. Anna called the police right away, her voice trembling with panic. It was immediately apparent to the initial responding officers that they were facing more than a straightforward heist. The scene's violence and the obvious evidence of a struggle suggested something much darker. In order to piece together the circumstances leading up to this fatal moment, detectives searched the residence for clues as the inquiry got underway. Detective Haley Miles, a seasoned investigator renowned for her sharp intuition and unwavering quest for the truth, was given the case 2 months after Emily's passing. Detective Miles recognized there was more to the story than a straightforward burglary gone awry as soon as she entered the investigation. Despite the chaos at the crime scene, several aspects didn't line together. The ransacking seeming spontaneity felt contrived, too planned in its sloppy manner. She had years of experience and was able to spot the tiny clues that frequently indicated a more sinister motivation. Examining the original reports again and carefully going through the material gathered at the scene, Detective Miles started her inquiry. At first, the hypothesis of a failed break-in was the main focus, but as she examined more data, her suspicions increased. The way the scene had been damaged was inconsistent, and Emily's murder seemed to indicate something far more intimate than a simple heist. As a murderous technique, strangulation was personal and motivated by intense feelings of rage, passion, and despair. Miles could see that Emily's death was not a senseless act of violence. Detective Miles started interviewing everyone who had interacted with Emily in the days preceding her death as part of her inquiry. One of the people called in for interrogation was Laura Morgan, a neighbor and close family friend. Laura expressed her shock and grief over Emily's untimely death while posing as the worried and encouraging neighbor. She seemed helpful, responding to all of the detective's inquiries and even providing more details when asked. But Detective Miles had been taught to look beyond words. Laura's hand shook a little during the interview, and she noticed small cues that made her uncomfortable, as well as times when she appeared to pause before responding. Although her responses were mostly consistent, Miles couldn't help but notice a few minor discrepancies, and her eyes would dart to the side when specific queries were posed. Although these findings weren't sufficient to make a direct accusation against Laura, they did raise some questions in the detective's mind. There was a problem. In an effort to learn more about Emily's last days, Detective Miles asked to view her phone records as part of her ongoing inquiry. Unexpectedly, the data showed a large volume of phone conversations and text messages between Emily and Laura in the months before her passing. These messages were out of the ordinary for a neighborly connection in terms of both timing and frequency. Although not directly incriminating, the communications suggested a closeness that didn't seem appropriate. This finding changed the investigation's focus. A much more personal goal was now being pursued by what had begun as a search for a random burglar. Detective Miles started looking into the idea that Emily and Laura had a deeper relationship than first appeared. The investigation's main focus was their relationship, which sparked inquiries regarding Laura's role in Emily's life and maybe her demise. The phone logs offered a fresh insight into Laura's possible intentions by implying that their relationship had been intense, if not problematic. Laura became much more prominent as a figure of interest after this disclosure, which further complicated the case. The forensic examination of the evidence gathered from the crime scene was finished as the inquiry went on. One particular finding, a minor but important one, jumped out. The material from a Lauren garment matched the fibers discovered on Emily's body. Despite being circumstantial, the evidence was an important component of the puzzle. Although the fibers alone did not establish guilt, they did establish a connection between Laura and the incident that made it difficult to ignore. Detective Miles increased her attention on Laura because she was aware that this discovery might hold the secret to the truth. A more complete examination of Laura's alibi and her activities on the day of the murder was made possible by this additional piece of evidence. In an effort to uncover new links between Laura and the crime, Miles started re-interviewing witnesses and obtaining more forensic evidence. With every new piece of evidence, the case was gradually coming together and encircling Laura. Even though the fibers were only one piece, when paired with the phone logs and Laura's dubious actions, they created a picture that was getting harder to deny. When a local teen came forward with a shocking piece of information on May 25th, the inquiry took yet another important turn. The witness stated that on the afternoon of Emily's death, she saw Laura leaving the Carter home. Although the teenager's testimony was initially unconfirmed, this sighting put Laura at the scene of the incident, which was consistent with the mounting evidence that Laura was involved. Detective Miles used a methodical approach to the witness, verifying the veracity of their story by comparing it with additional evidence. There was no apparent reason for the witness to lie, and their account was consistent. The case against Laura was significantly enhanced by this additional testimony. An eyewitness statement, phone records, and forensic evidence were combined to create a convincing story that implied Laura had been there as Emily was dying. Detective Miles understood that Laura would eventually have enough to make an arrest since the walls were closing in on her. Detective Haley Miles sought and secured a search warrant for the Morgan residence in light of the growing evidence against Laura Morgan. The crew carried out a thorough search, looking in every area of the property for any evidence linking Laura to Emily Carter's murder. An important piece of evidence surfaced throughout the hunt. A piece of Emily's necklace, hidden among Laura's possessions. It was a damning revelation. Emily's parents attested to the fact that the necklace was a unique item that Emily had worn often. Its discovery in Laura's possession prompted suspicions right away, and it was unlikely that it was a coincidence. Detective Miles needed this discovery to complete his puzzle. In a manner that was difficult to express, the necklace connected Laura and Emily intimately. Laura was taken into custody on suspicion of murder right away. The stunning announcement sent shockwaves through the neighborhood, shattering the perception of Laura as a loving mother and wife. Everyone concerned started to realize how serious the situation was. There was more to this arrest than just a crime. It was about trust being destroyed, betrayal, and hidden lives. Laura Morgan was officially charged with first-degree murder following weeks of investigation and evidence collection. Given the alleged premeditation of the offense, the prosecution deemed the charge to be serious. But Laura insisted she was innocent and had nothing to do with Emily's passing. She said she had just neglected to give the jewelry back to the Carters after discovering it while out for a walk in the area. However, neither the public nor the authorities were significantly influenced by this reasoning. Her account was improbable at best, and the evidence was stacked against her. Both locally and internationally, the case garnered a lot of attention. The notion that a suburban housewife might be complicit in such a heinous act both fascinated and appalled people. On the day Laura was charged, the courtroom was crowded with media and bystanders who wanted to see the woman who had transformed from an exemplary citizen to a suspected killer. There was a lot of excitement before Laura Morgan's trial started. With the help of a skilled and tenacious team, the prosecution made a strong case that vividly described the events leading up to Emily's death. They emphasized Laura and Emily's affair, highlighting Laura's increasingly possessive and obsessive behavior in the weeks leading up to the murder. The timeline presented by the prosecution demonstrated how Laura's fear of losing control over Emily and her jealousy had led her to do the unimaginable. A key component of the prosecution's case was forensic evidence. Laura's culpability was demonstrated by the fibers discovered on Emily's body, the phone logs, and the eyewitness accounts. The last nail in the coffin was the jewelry that was found in Laura's possession. In order to further illustrate Laura's pathological attachment, the prosecution contended that she had preserved it as a perverted souvenir of her relationship with Emily. The defense found it difficult to refute the overwhelming evidence as the trial progressed. Laura's denials of guilt appeared more and more flimsy in light of the prosecution's thorough and incriminating evidence. Every fresh piece of evidence strengthened the prosecution's case during the heated trial. The jury, which was composed of regular people, listened carefully, their expressions becoming more solemn as the case went on. The jury returned a unanimous decision following weeks of testimony, evidence presentation, and tearful courtroom moments. Laura Morgan was convicted of murder in the first degree. As the decision's weight descended upon the courtroom, the verdict was given with a sense of finality. As the sentence, life in jail without the chance of parole, was read, Laura's face stayed grim. Given the seriousness of her offense, the sentencing guaranteed her a life sentence in prison. Many people found closure with the verdict, especially Emily's family, who had suffered for months after her passing. But it also left a community to deal with the fallout. Laura's years of maintaining a flawless facade had now been irrevocably destroyed. Once peaceful and tight-knit, the neighborhood was left in chaos as locals struggled to comprehend that someone they believed to be familiar could be capable of such violence. The neighborhood was still in shock in the days after the decision. The Morgans had exemplified suburban prosperity. Richard, the successful lawyer, and Laura, the ideal housewife. That image was now permanently damaged. Unable to handle the gravity of what had transpired, Richard Morgan filed for divorce and left the area. He was unable to handle the pressure of the trial, the attention from the public, and the betrayal by the woman he believed to be his acquaintance. The Morgan family, as the area had known them, ended with his departure. The neighborhood was left to pick up the slack. People started talking about the case a lot and making assumptions about what could have pushed Laura to such extremes. Some said it was just an example of someone losing control, while others suggested it was the burden of keeping up her ideal life. Whatever the cause, the case turned into a warning, a reminder that no one's life is as ideal as it appears. One could only speculate about the intricacies Detective Haley Miles had uncovered as the case faded from the news. Dark truths hidden beneath the surface of suburban life were revealed by what started out as a regular investigation into a robbery. Was it possible to prevent Laura Morgan's spiral into madness? Or did her infatuation with Emily make it inevitable? It is possible that Emily would still be alive if Laura had taken a different route. Was there ever a moment when things may have gone differently? Or was this catastrophe predetermined to occur? Laura's story serves as a reminder that there may be evil lurking behind every closed door. We now have to ask ourselves, what other secrets are still hidden in the quiet neighborhoods around us, as Laura serves her life sentence? To ensure that you don't miss any of our true crime stories, kindly subscribe to our channel. There are several accounts of regular lives devolving into turmoil, when secrecy and obsession prove to be the final straw. Check them out, please.